Today we're joined by Victoria Moxham, Director of Customer and Code Management at Elexon. With over 20 years' experience in the organisation, she now oversees the customer-focused business activities and plays a key role in facilitating the market changes needed to support the UK's transition to net zero.
Welcome to Next Time Around, brought to you by Powerverse, the podcast where we take on the big questions of the green transition and explore how the world is changing for a cleaner, brighter future. We are your hosts, Richard Britton
and Lauren Forster,
and we'll be diving into the tech, the policies and the big ideas that are reshaping industries and people's lives. Whether it's cutting-edge innovations or shifting priorities, we're here to figure out what it all means for you and the world we're building for tomorrow. So buckle up as we take a fresh look at how the changes today are laying the groundwork for a better next time around.
Welcome to Next Time Around, Victoria.
Hi, thank you.
Hello. Thanks for joining.
Great to have you here.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Victoria, you have been building a successful career in the energy sector now for a while, and it's been a time of huge transition and change for the sector. So we're really interested to find out a bit more about what drew you into it in the first place.
I feel slightly fraudulent because the real reason that I joined Elexon is that I wanted a job in London. I was really young. I'd done a graduate placement scheme with a travel company, actually, and I was living in Folkestone, and I loved the job, but I hated being in Folkestone. I felt really isolated, and all my friends were in London, so I just wanted a job in London. And I saw this job advertised, and I thought, it sounds like I could use my economics degree a little bit. And I ended up at Elexon. But I think probably the helpful part of the answer to this question is that, goodness me, it's not the company or the industry that I joined 23 years ago. And looking back, and exercises like this almost give you an opportunity to kind of think and look back a little bit. Elexon's changed vastly. We used to be a small organisation with a very limited and defined role. And really our role was to kind of keep our heads under the parapet, quietly get on with what we did, not really be seen or noticed. And if we weren't seen or noticed, that was deemed kind of a sign of success. But move the clock forward to today, and I think there are certain things about the core of Elexon that remain true, but we're a wildly different organisation. We've absolutely kind of moved beyond the scope of our original remit. We're doing loads more stuff. And yeah, it's a really exciting time to be almost at the very epicenter of the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's tracking very closely with an enormous shift of what's been happening in terms of generation and everything that's happening in the grid.
Yeah. I either tell fibs to people about what I did for a job because it just wasn't very interesting, or spend about 20 minutes trying to explain it. But actually now, energy is something that people talk about. It's in the paper.
Yes.
It's in the news every day, for good or bad. But it's so relevant now compared to back then, 20 years ago.
Definitely. Yeah. I think for the listeners who might not necessarily know or have heard about Elexon before, could you describe what role it plays within the market?
Yeah, sure. So our core role really is that we're the balancing and settlement code company, so that we're there to balance and settle wholesale energy trading. We consume a lot of data. We balance the books between suppliers and generators by comparing what they say they're going to put onto the grid and take off. Then we go through a kind of truing up process, which takes 14 months, and we shift money around if we need to, so that at the end of the day, there's a kind of zero-sum game. Everybody's paid for any imbalances that they need to pay for. Increasingly over time, our role has evolved, but I think that we've stayed very true to our core skills of balancing settlement using data and settling big amounts of money.
Yeah, amazing.
And you're right, and they are very large amounts of money because there's a lot at stake, I suppose, and you're the referee that sits in the middle of all of that with the different players involved. Perhaps for our listeners, you could describe what balancing the grid is for, why that's important.
Yeah, so you use the term referee, and that's interesting because often when I've tried to explain our role to my parents, that kind of people who aren't in the industry, I haven't used the term referee because I guess Ofgem might consider that they're more of a referee, but there was once an analogy that became a bit complicated that looked at the kind of, you've got a golf course, you've got someone who collects the green fees, counts how much people are using the course and then distributes sums accordingly. But I guess another way of looking at our role is that because you can't store energy in a box, the energy will flow as people switch their lights on, etc. So what we do is take a record of how much suppliers think they're going to need to supply their customers. They strike up contracts with generators to buy energy to fulfill their requirement. Inevitably, when it comes to the day, there's some inaccuracy around what suppliers predict they're going to need and what actually is needed. That's imbalance. We calculate that imbalance by taking millions and millions of meter readings over a period of 14 months. Over time, those meter readings become more accurate, and we shift the money around to pay for any imbalances if suppliers haven't contracted enough, need a bit more for National Grid to balance the system. There's a cost to that, and we kind of true up those costs so that the suppliers and generators pay what they should do.
So ultimately, Elexon is kind of right at the core of keeping the lights on, because if the imbalance is there, the lights will go off.
Yeah, exactly. And in my head, when I'm thinking of describing this to you, I've got a kind of set of weighing scales that always need to be balanced. And it's that settlement and balancing that we do over time to make sure that everything does balance and people pay and receive the right amount.
And didn't we see that when that doesn't go right, what happens with Spain last year? Yeah, where they just had the blackout for ages.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so a really important role. I guess with the industry changing quite a lot, the market changing, how do you identify which initiatives are important to implement?
A really kind of key characteristic of us as an organisation is that we sit at the centre of the industry, we're impartial, we consult a lot with industries, key stakeholders, our funding parties. So at the moment, those priorities are largely driven by industry, who have the ability to raise modifications, by Ofgem and DESNZ, who have the ability to direct us in certain areas. We're seeing a change come in at the end of this year. Our role is going to shift slightly from being code administrator to code manager, and that will give us a lot more autonomy to propose changes, make changes on our own, not without industry, because that need to consult with industry still remains, and we'll need to be demonstrating that we're seeking industry input, really closely engaging. So I think that in terms of looking at priorities, at the moment, a lot of it is driven by industry, DESNZ, Ofgem. In the future, that's going to shift a little bit, and we'll be having to demonstrate that we're fulfilling the needs of Ofgem's strategic direction statement, which is encouraging the whole industry, all of the code bodies, to perhaps think a little bit more cohesively to make sure that collectively we're driving forward the right changes, ultimately to make sure that we're hitting net zero targets, etc.
And is that because of the fact that it's becoming more complicated? When you think about what energy production used to be, it was a large gas or coal power station, switch it on, switch it off. Whereas now we've got wind and solar,
it's
and
so
they
different.
kind of come and go. They're intermittent, and the grid is more complicated. So kind of matching that reality for you of what's needed must be harder. But also those companies doing their job and keeping this grid the way it needs to be must be much harder than it was.
Yeah. I mean, we're using words that we just didn't use 20 years ago. Flexibility, that kind of thing, is a word that we're using all the time and is becoming so important. I think much more consumer involvement is really important. We've got things like market-wide half-hourly, smart metering. The market's evolved so much. And you're right, we're not looking at big, dirty coal power stations anymore. It's all of that kind of flexible, clean energy that is really important. And those rules need to evolve to make sure that we're properly making use of that really good, clean power.
I've just got a follow-up question on that. It must feel good to be part of something that's really at the cutting edge, because the UK is sort of cracking some of the challenges that other countries are behind on a little bit, and you're right in the middle of all that. That must feel good.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And I think that when we take on new bits of work, it's exciting, but also you can see that actually this really fits. Lots of our new responsibilities are working towards that flexibility agenda and towards genuinely making sure that as a nation, we're kind of achieving our clean power targets. So yeah, it's really exciting. And as I said before, it is not the industry that I joined 23 years ago.
And I can't see it slowing down either.
No, every year we say, oh my God, it's the busiest year we've ever had. But it's exponential, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think,
Life's getting faster.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely. You actually touched on flexibility just there a little bit. So I think it'd be really good if we dive more into that. That's obviously a term that has gone from being quite specialist in the past to very much at the centre of what's happening at the moment. So what do you think's really driven the shift into flexibility?
Oh, well, it feels like it's kind of snuck up on us and it's here and in our faces. But actually, I guess it's been something that over time has developed. And I guess that we're now in a position where we've got this richness of data that we've never had before. We've got the AI technology that allows us to use that data. And also we've got the need, frankly, for consumers to be able to take part in flexibility. And I talked a moment ago about smart metering and how that was a nudge in the right direction. Market-wide half-hourly, again, another nudge. So I think that the whole flexibility thing is really about making sure that we're making use of an energy system as efficiently as possible, managing those peaks and troughs, fine-tuning so that we can save money on mega investment in huge dirty power stations and make use of that kind of much more distributed, local, clean energy that we've got at our fingertips if we can harness it in the right way.
It's really interesting that you mentioned local because, again, back to how it was and how it is now, the sort of the national scale infrastructure, which is still there, is now being matched by more regional and local. And, I talk to companies that are taking their own kind of commercial view on this, and they've got big batteries sitting behind their meters, and you've got grid scale stuff happening as well, and right down to kind of consumer level. But it's kind of democratizing that across the whole range, isn't it, from local up to national?
Yeah, exactly that.
Victoria, so Ofgem have appointed Elexon now to act as a market facilitator for flexibility. What does that role involve?
Yeah, again, that's a really exciting evolution of our role. So pre us being appointed as market facilitator, there was stuff going on in the flex market, but there was a bit of a lack of consistency. Rules weren't particularly clear. And I think that there was a real concern from Ofgem that we weren't getting the most as an industry out of flexibility just because of an absolute lack of clarity, and that there wasn't the oomph behind that market to get people involved because unclear registration systems, differing rules. If you're taking part over here, then there's a different set of rules over here that you might not be familiar with. So I think that there was a feeling that potential flexibility providers were kind of flailing a bit in an environment where there was just a lack of clarity. So our role as market facilitator is to, and again, back to the core of what is close to Elexon's heart, governance and rules, which sounds potentially a bit tedious and constraining, but actually really good things come from governance and rules when they're clear and when everybody's on a level playing field and has a real understanding. And again, harking back to our role as BSC code administrator, really important that we're engaging with industry. So lots of the characteristics that have worked so well for us with our BSC role will be really evident in our flex role as well. So having clear rules, but working with industry to change those rules and evolve those rules if they need it. Also, back to when you called us the referee, there's a need for compliance, there's a need for assurance. So we'll have a role in overseeing the rollout of those rules. Are people sticking to the rules? Are there incentives there to make sure that people stick to those rules? Ultimately, with a view to making sure that flexibility markets are attractive for people to get involved in and that people are able to take part in the flexibility markets because they're very clear on what that involves.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that is a fantastic point. The clearer it is, the easier that it will be for people to adopt it.
Even down to almost an extension of the flex role, which is we're developing something called the FMAR, Flexibility Market Asset Register, which again is just really a big list of flexibility assets. It sounds really simple, but how much better is that if you've got a very clear set list of all of those flexible assets as a starting point? It seems kind of really fundamental. So yeah, there are various facets of our work in flexibility, all with the ultimate aim of just making things clearer.
Oh, well, I just find all this stuff fascinating. There have been a few things that you said. It sounds like it's an extremely data-driven organisation and it's all built on having really good quality data. How do you manage to put all of that together at the sort of scale that you need?
Yeah, well, gosh, the evolution of data is kind of wild. If you're geeky about this kind of thing, it's mind-blowing. The numbers I can't even kind of fathom in my mind. So as we're moving towards half-hourly settlement, the data that we're going to be crunching is just going to be rising exponentially. I need to look up the number. I think it's 50 billion meter readings a year that we're going to be dealing with once market-wide half-hourly settlement.
Multiplying the number of households and smart meters by the half-hourly settlement. What's the sort of shift from and to on that? I mean, because at the moment, if you think about the amount of data collection that's happening and what you're moving to, this is just like it's like jumping off a cliff, isn't it?
I mean, it's huge. It's, you know what, I even got the multiplier wrong. It's 500 billion meter readings a year that we'll be dealing with when we're in a market-wide half-hourly world. I can't even picture how many noughts that is.
Not sure many people can.
And we're moving from settlement over 14 months to 4 months, which is great in itself because it means that there's much more certainty for suppliers. And I think that richness of data means that suppliers will be able to offer time of use tariffs in a way that they never have before. We've had smart meters for a long time, but one of my roles was on the consumer side of things. And back kind of 10, 12 years ago, we were thinking about, well, what's the point in smart meters if people are still being billed on these profiles that are accurate to a degree, but fairly vague. So now we've got this richness of data. Even if you don't have a smart meter in your household, you'll benefit from that data that we've got that enables us to make profiles that are much more accurate and reflective, and will only get more accurate over time. I've forgotten what your original question was.
Oh, my original question was just as I think a data geek or whatever you described it as, or just somebody who's very interested in the sheer amount of data that's getting generated.
Yeah.
So to give us a bit of a flavour of how Elexon makes that happen at scale, and I think you just have. You're sort of preparing
we
yourself
had
for that.
I guess casting minds back a little bit, 5 or so years ago, we had to really overhaul the technology that underpins all of that calculation that we do, because frankly, it was 20 years old because things have moved on, but the settlement systems hadn't really. So the first step in really kind of galvanizing ourselves for dealing with those 500 billion meter readings a year was to make sure that we'd got great modern settlement systems that could absorb that data and deal with it. And I think that, well, I can't imagine the opportunities that data is going to bring us. Elexon is going to hold so much data that is going to be so valuable and so useful as we move through the rollout of market-wide half-hourly, as all the flexibility stuff really embeds and takes off. Yeah, I think that the industry will have access to data that is going to be incredibly useful.
Thank you.
What downstream benefits does that have for, I guess, not only businesses, but the end user having the half-hourly settlement?
So what it should really open up is opportunities for people to adjust their energy usage and be rewarded for that. And again, back to that point of managing the peaks and troughs, data is great at kind of leading to incentives for people changing their behaviour. And I think that some behaviour you'll never change. If you ask my mum and dad to, I don't know, not make a coffee at 7:30 in the morning, they'd screw their faces up at me and they would. But I think that what all of this data does give us the opportunity for is to say, okay, I've got my electric car and I need it charged for 8 o'clock in the morning when I've got to drive to school or to the station or wherever. But actually, I don't care when it's charged, as long as it's ready when I need it. And so all of this data opens up an absolute kind of glut of opportunities for the suppliers to introduce those smart time of use tariffs that make it really easy and really beneficial for everyday people who possibly aren't as interested in kind of poring over their energy data to become kind of flexible users of energy and to help us, as I said, back to that point of balancing the peaks and the troughs.
Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant. Really interesting. I suppose my own point of view is this is a really obvious candidate for AI to help because, you know, there's lots of chat about AI at the moment, rightly, and some is positive and some is not. But in terms of AI that's actually helping people in their day-to-day lives, as you say, it's quite difficult for people to make all those micro decisions right about what to do. But actually systems can do that.
Exactly.
Especially when people have got more home storage, like a vehicle, for example, then you can flatten out those peaks and have AI help you.
Yeah. And I think we're just at the beginning of the journey with that. Something that, well, we've been using AI for a couple of years now. We have this glut of data that I told you about. Sometimes things go wrong. An example recently was that there was a big cable to, I think it was a wind farm, and the cable got cut by a digger. And so we were seeing these kind of errors in settlement. The data wasn't being recorded properly. It took a while to notice that because it was a bit of a needle in a haystack. We developed some AI that kind of picks up hotspots instantly. So if we've got those kind of glitchy little errors in settlement from meters perhaps being installed the wrong way round, a digger cutting through a cable, those needles in haystacks are flagging up immediately now. And they're in and themselves not huge kind of in terms of monetary value, but collectively it's really important that settlement is accurate. And that's just one example of where we've been able to use AI to kind of crunch through that data in a way that we couldn't before. And I think we're, as I said a moment ago, on the cusp of really exciting things with that kind of absolute tsunami of data that we've got at our disposal.
Totally. And for the people you work with, the suppliers you work with, that's going to change the complexion of their work as well, isn't it? And maybe even the nature of some of the people that you are working with.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even within Elexon, if you look at the type of people that we're recruiting now, very different to the type of people we were recruiting 10 years or so ago. And I think our whole industry now is recognizing that actually we need to learn from other industries. So when I meet new starters in Elexon, they've come from all over the place. 15 years ago, they would all have been from within industry. And I think that having that mix is really important. Yes, you need that deep embedded knowledge of how our industry works, because it is a bit quirky and there is benefit in understanding that history. But goodness me, we need to learn from other industries who've kind of been there and done that. And again, another really exciting aspect of being in this industry at the moment.
Definitely. I mean, we talk quite frequently about learning from the telecoms industry, who's already gone through the changes multiple times, and like, what can this industry learn from what they did and do it better? Which is great. Victoria, you mentioned the importance of data and how much more data there is becoming available, especially with AI. How can businesses work together to improve interoperability, and why is that so important to making sure that this industry is the most effective?
Okay, so I think that's a really interesting question. The starting point of the answer to that is that, again, as I mentioned before, we're in a world where the generation mix is completely different to how it was before. We used to be relying largely on big power stations. Now we're in a world where we've got much more flexible, decentralised energy. We've got flexibility options. We've got EV chargers that can be used as people's own little kind of mini power station in their front yard, people with solar panels on their roofs. And so, of course, interoperability is going to be really important. And again, I think it goes back to that need for governance and rules and all the kind of boring stuff that sets a really level playing field for everybody. Interoperability is really important because if we have any hope of wanting to get consumers actively involved in this, they need to be confident that their solar panels are going to be interoperable with the system in the way that their EV charger is, even if they buy them 5 years apart, and that they've got confidence in things like the data security, that they're not going to be hacked, that there aren't going to be cybersecurity issues. So I think, again, a new role for Elexon is delivering the smart, secure energy system governance. That is a recent thing that DESNZ have asked us to do. And that's, again, falling back on our key skills of governance, rules, etc., etc. What we're doing is making sure that there's a really clear set of rules around standards, governance, technology, security, all that kind of thing, so that, the starting line is very clear. So everybody understands the kind of, I was going to say rules, but that sounds draconian. I think it's more requirements, the requirements that they need to fulfill. And once you've got that great starting point, again, working with industry. And for us, this is exciting because it's working with a new set of industry participants. We've historically only dealt predominantly with suppliers and generators, but this is moving us into a world of technology providers, much closer to the end consumer, really.
So what we've seen in our research, Victoria, is that this industry is changing and it's opening up, and there are opportunities for people to use their car like their own little power plant at home. And there are some emerging players doing some of that work to help them trade the energy on there. But very often the participation rates are quite low at the moment, let's say below 20%. And so it sounds like there's a kind of a daisy chain of things that need to be connected in that interoperable way to make that work. What are your hopes for how that will change?
I'd be interested in what the number is. 20% seems optimistic to me. But yeah, certainly I think that the really crucial thing is bringing together all of those players. So manufacturers, service providers, consumer organisations are going to be really important. Even people like standards bodies, regulators, government, to make sure that those energy smart appliances are kind of, starting from a consistent perspective. Rules will need to change. And as things evolve, rules need to change. And again, that's something that we're really adept at and really used to, working with government regulators, industry participants, to kind of introduce change in a really open, collaborative way. Again, to make sure that we've got industry on board. And I think that probably as a consumer, you don't need to know this. You don't need to know that Elexon are in the background setting up standards around security and data and that kind of thing. But I think for consumers and energy companies, it needs to be easy for them to take part. They don't need to know what goes on behind the scenes. It just needs to be really easy for consumers to participate, I think.
And for that to be easy for the participation of the consumers, I'm imagining from what you've said, it's kind of a coming together of energy providers, but also the manufacturers that are producing the goods as well, because they've got a role to play in the security, and the software providers, and making sure all of those things sort of work in a proper ecosystem for the benefit of the consumer.
Yeah. And I think we're probably slightly fighting against a history of skepticism and alarming headlines and that kind of thing. So I think there's a job to be done. Casting our eyes back maybe a decade or so ago when smart meters were the new thing. I can remember I worked at Consumer Focus and we were thinking about how do we get the man and woman on the street engaged in this? And we were thinking about things like we need a national treasure to be really selling them. I remember someone said you need Joanna Lumley to be telling everybody to get smart meters. Interestingly, last night I saw an advert on TV and I'm sure Grant Mitchell was being used to kind of big up the benefits of smart meters. Right. I don't know if he's maybe the new national treasure.
Iconic.
The new Joanna Lumley.
But I think that for consumers, having trust is really important. That their data isn't going to be mishandled. They're not going to be spied on. That they're not going to wake up and have a cold house in the morning because things have gone wrong. Their fridge hasn't been turned off overnight without their say-so as some kind of big brother balancing kind of route. So yeah, I think that, again, rules, governance, clarity, and I guess all that really leads to confidence in a system.
And trust.
Yeah.
Consumer standards, consumer trust marks, that sort of stuff. That's going to make all of this change.
Yeah. Because actually, as an individual consumer, why would you? We need to kind of smash down all of those barriers, and I think a lot of those barriers are probably imagined. So I think that there's a huge education piece as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that consumers won't even think about.
And why should they?
That's enabling a lot for them at home to keep costs down, to make it as easy as possible. So, I guess with flexibility, obviously participation rates are fairly low. We know it's such an important topic to balance the grid and reach net zero. What do you think can be done to really make that effortless for consumers rather than complicated, because that's always going to be friction?
Yeah, I guess it needs to be something that consumers don't even need to think about. You maybe think about it once and you say, yeah, I don't mind if you make my fridge a bit warmer in the middle of the night if necessary, but I don't want my milk to go off. If consumers can decide, I talked earlier about electric cars, you just want your electric car to be charged by the time you wake up. So I think probably for most consumers, they probably don't want to have to make any decisions or even engage in it at all. We talked in the past about prosumers who are really interested and love the data and kind of pour through it and really want to be actively kind of engaged and involved. But I think that the trick is that for most consumers, they want to switch their lights on and it works. They want to be able to turn their oven on to cook their dinner, put their washing machine on to clean their clothes. And actually all of the peripheral stuff is noise. So I think it's a mixture of making it really easy and frictionless, decisionless. But then I guess also kind of incentivizing. And if consumers can see that if they do change their habits slightly, that there's a lower bill at the end of the day, then I guess that's going to be another thing that will encourage people. And then that kind of almost takes the circle full loop back to market-wide half-hourly, smart meters, time of use tariffs, etc.
Yeah,
all that good
definitely.
stuff.
And I guess that interface, the kind of app that they're using, is going to be so important for that, because that's the only point that they're engaging with it, really.
I mean, I'm like right in the middle of the energy industry, and I'm ashamed to say that my smart meter reader is in my drawer. I don't even know where it is. I never look at it. And so I think that it's not an interesting topic for most people, is it? So I think kind of remove the friction, remove the decision making, just make it really easy for people.
Make it easy.
Yeah.
And use the data, use the AI, bring that all up into some kind of consumer experience that they trust and they don't have to think about.
Yeah. That's kind of underpinned by really strong governance and regulation that kind of supports the wider ecosystem of the industry that's working together, driving things forward. But yeah, that trust kind of underpinning everything. And also efficiency. We're a really complicated industry. If you were to start from scratch, you probably wouldn't arrange it in the way it is. And again, I talked earlier about code reform, which is giving Elexon as a code manager more autonomy and encouraging us to work with other code managers in the industry to kind of help the whole ecosystem just work in a smoother, more efficient way.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Victoria. We've got one final question for you, which is, what is needed, if you could pick one thing, to deliver long-term energy security?
Oh, that's a head scratcher. I think that's a really difficult question, because I'm not sure there is one thing.
Yeah.
Because of the complexity of energy systems, I think that we need to make sure that we've got a system that's always balanced, but that is flexible, that's resilient. And I guess that stepping back and answering how do you make sure that you've got that, it's around reliable generation and the effective use of assets that are low carbon, decentralised, all working smoothly, efficiently from that place of good, solid, strong regulation.
Yeah.
And can I add one more thing, or ask you one more thing on that?
Yeah.
Because to make that happen, you've already described something really interesting, which is like a shift in consumer behaviour. So there becomes a behavioural element to make this stuff work as well, for the trust, so that it's mutual.
Yeah. And then also being able to respond to those behavioural shifts. So making sure that we've got an infrastructure that can respond to that changing demand. And again, back to flattening out those peaks and troughs and making sure that we're delivering an energy system perhaps without some of the massive investment that might otherwise be needed if we were catering for those peaks.
Victoria, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
And
Thanks
you
for coming on
too.
next
Thank
time
you.
around.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
It's been great. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn. Just search Powerverse, or share it with somebody who you think might find it interesting and helpful. To find out more about our software, visit our website www.powerverse.com. Thank you for listening. Until next time.